You cannot shave a man's beard in his absence.
You cannot shave a man's beard in his absence.
No, you cannot.
Kabisa?
Well, the beard is not detachable. You can't sort of like be in one room and your beard is in another. You move with it. It's not a shoe.
Clearly not. Dr. Robert Mathenge is a consultant interventional cardiologist. He is the head of the cardiology and what section at Nairobi Hospital?
Yes.
He is, now what's that word?
Phlebologist?
That one.
Oh, that's a vein specialist, like varicose veins.
Okay.
Yes.
Phlebologists at Equatorial Heart and Blood Vessel Clinic.
Yes, yes.
And all those many other things. Karibu sana daktari.
Asante sana.
Good to have you on the show.
Yes, asante sana.
Let's start with that phlebologist part. We'll go to the heart we know.
The phlebs know.
The phlebs. What are those?
The body, the heart pumps blood to the tissues through the arteries.
Yeah.
But how does the blood get back to the heart? Through the veins.
The veins.
And the veins have special characteristics because they are close to the skin. They are very superficial. And that's what causes problems in future because they are very superficial, not covered by adequate tissue. They tend to balloon out based on whether you increase your weight, based on your occupation. Sometimes you stand for too long, and sometimes based on your own inborn, characteristics. Some of us are tall, others are short. The same with the veins. Some are strong, some are weak. And the veins, because of gravity, sometimes they tend to balloon out. And you see some people's legs have large, tortuous vessels that are ugly. And sometimes that causes a lot of swelling in the legs and causes even wounds, ulcers that are very difficult to heal. So a phlebologist is a person who studies how to diagnose that condition using various tests and then using various techniques to treat, some of them which are minimally invasive, like laser treatments and some other injections or medications. So anybody who takes time and studies the treatment of veins, such as varicose veins, is called a phlebologist.
Okay.
Yes.
Phlebologist with PHL.
Yes.
Phlebo. Like
and that's
farmer.
something that, on top of being a cardiologist, that I later went on and said, let's complete the system and do.
So it's a different
the veins.
study.
Is related but different.
Okay.
So essentially, what is a phleb?
Phleb is literally Latin for vein.
Okay.
Yes, Latin, yes.
Okay.
It just sounds fancier when you
is
say
there a different-
phlebologist as opposed to veinologist.
Venologist.
Yes, absolutely.
Is there a different study for arteries?
Yes, there is. It's called agiology. Agiology. That's now Latin. Agiology. But then it becomes a bit. It's easier for some reason. In fact, she's absolutely correct because you say for veins we talk about arteries, but for veins we are using Latin. I think it's just the way names sound and what is easier to say because agiology is a bit too mouthful. Yes, but the study of arteries and their treatments is called agiology. And you even have people called agiologists. But in our area, where we say a cardiologist, in the basic training of a cardiologist, you should be able to know about the heart and be able to know about the arteries as well. But if you want to extend, now you can do phlebology as well.
To do the veins.
Yes.
When it comes to heart and heart conditions, we keep throwing in words. There is a heart failure, heart disease, cardiac arrests. What other heart things we talk about?
Blood pressure.
Yes. We just keep throwing. Akona ugonjwa ya roho. He had a heart attack.
Yes.
Heart mama.
Hole in the heart.
All those things.
Absolutely.
And especially when it comes to cause of death.
Yes.
That's when you're just throwing, he got a heart attack. He got a cardiac arrest. He got a this and the other. Just explain to us those terms. And so we no longer misuse.
When you hear the word cardiac arrest, it is literally the end result of all those other conditions that you're talking about. Because the end result, the heart has arrested. In other words, it has failed, has stopped functioning because of other processes. What are those other processes? Those other processes could be now the heart attack. Okay, you get a heart attack. What is a heart attack? is when the heart is unable to receive adequate blood supply. You know, the heart is a muscle that contracts. It squeezes. Now, as we are speaking here, as we are resting here, it is doing so at about maybe 70 times a minute. In 24 hours, it will have contracted and relaxed about 100,000 times. And yet, you know, you're not aware of it. Can you imagine that activity requires a lot of oxygen, a lot of nutrition, a lot of glucose, and that has to be delivered by a very efficient blood supply. Now, when that blood supply is compromised, the little arteries that supply, they are tiny, very effective arteries. When they are compromised and blood does not reach the heart muscle, it's so sensitive that within a few minutes you start getting chest pain. And if that nothing is done, then you get the heart muscle starts dying off because, you know, and then of course you have a heart attack. So in one of the processes that will lead to a cardiac arrest, and that's why I said it's the final process, is, for instance, not enough blood or oxygen or the arteries of the heart being blocked, leading to a heart attack. There are other diseases that will come and affect the heart muscle. For instance, there are people who would get COVID, and COVID affects the virus of the COVID virus affects the heart, okay? And the heart muscle now becomes wobbly. It can no longer efficiently, you know, squeeze. Or even other viruses, even the ordinary flu viruses. Then you end up with somebody getting heart failure. What is the failure of the pump? Because the heart is a pump, pumping blood into the vessels. You know, you feel your pulse, you feel something, you feel the pressure. Yeah. That pressure is generated by heart muscle power. If that muscle becomes wobbly because it has been inflamed by a virus, or sometimes the muscles just fail at some point in some people, that's now called heart failure. Pump failure, that's heart failure.
So when you have a heart attack,
yes,
you can survive it.
You can survive a heart attack.
Isn't it?
And
can you survive heart failure?
You can survive heart failure. Number one, depending on the cause. Sometimes some causes are just like flu, self-limiting. They will cause damage over 2, 3, 4 weeks. And then after that, when the virus goes away, the body fights it off. Like the flu virus, the body fights the flu virus off. Then you find that the heart muscle starts now getting stronger again. So in other words, heart failure is also treatable. Okay, but it is much more treatable if you're able to identify the cause, because some causes are more treatable than others. So the most important thing is to find out, why is this person in heart failure? It may just be because they have uncontrolled blood pressure, hypertension. If you control that blood pressure, the heart muscle now, you know, starts functioning normally, becomes healthy. So cause of heart failure, very important. But we have treatment. We have lots and lots of people who are diagnosed with heart failure. We put them on medications, and they go back to their normal lives.
Dr. Yes. Can I tell when my heart is failing?
Oh, yes, you can, for sure.
Not attack, fail.
Failing, yes. Yeah. Remember, what is it supposed to do? Why is the heart pumping in the first place? It's trying to pump oxygen, blood to your lungs, so that in the lungs, the blood can receive oxygen, which you need. Now, what happens if the pump has failed and blood is not getting into your lungs? The number one thing you'll find is that you walk from here to the door there, you're short of breath. Again, because you're not pumping effectively. Blood is not able to get to your kidneys, where now excess water is removed so that you can pass urine, you know? So you find that the body starts swelling up. So you start feeling your legs are swelling. When you walk from a short distance, you are short of breath. When you lie in bed at night, that water that was in your legs because of gravity comes to your lungs, and you find that you have to wake up at night in a hurry because you are short of breath. So the signs are very classical for heart failure, and you cannot miss it when your heart is starting to fail.
Can you be born with a bad heart?
Yes, you can be born with what is congenital. You know, I mean, the wonder of nature is such that you're able to get a whole human being with absolutely nothing going wrong, born with everything, your eyes, your ears.
Perfect.
But sometimes, perfect. But sometimes things, for some reason rearrange themselves in a certain way. And you find that, like, for instance, the heart has partitions. It's two hearts with a central partition and then the other partitions as well. And you find that sometimes those walls don't come together to close so that somebody is born with a hole in the heart. Sometimes a blood vessel, because you have vessels that when the heart pumps, blood has to get out. Sometimes they come out through the wrong chamber. But these are very, very few instances. Very few instances, but it happens. Okay. Despite the perfection, of the creator, there are some things that come out like that.
Right.
Now, so you can be born with what we call congenital heart disease. That is congenital heart disease.
So
born with.
born with.
Again, Kenya is one of those countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, which established, facilities to treat this. Over many years, since the 70s, we have had ways, way ahead of other countries. Others started maybe 10, 15 years ago. So Kenya is one of those places where we've been able to, we have cardiothoracic surgeons who are able to open up the chest, seal. Sometimes we have other techniques where you don't have to open up the chest. You put a little umbrella through the groin or through the hand, through the groin or through the hand, and you go and you seal that hole and remove everything. So congenital heart disease is there. But it is also treatable. The key thing is to be diagnosed early, and of course now to present yourself for treatment.
If you did a comparative analysis between congenital and then, I don't know what the other term would be for those
acquired.
Thank you. Acquired. Which would be in the majority?
Acquired, for sure acquired. Because if you look at why even we think about the heart most of the time, it's because of the impact of acquired heart disease on society, on life. I mean, for instance, if you look at the West, where we are, all the things we do take us towards the West. One of two people will die from acquired heart disease, acquired cardiovascular disease, one of two. But congenital heart disease, we are talking about maybe 3% of the population. So it is very impactful. But what really impacts society in a large way, with a large death rate. For instance, a third of the death all over the world. A third. Remember, there are like hundreds of diseases, but a third of the death all over the world are due to heart disease.
A third.
Despite there being like 200, 300, 500 diseases.
Wow.
That one disease kills about a third of the world population. So that's why it's very critical and very important. And that's why even the whole idea of World Heart Day, because there's a disease. That's the whole rationale for letting people know, hey, here, there's a problem, even here, I mean, most of us, our lives, we talk about the West being one out of two, but there is very little difference between him and the West. So that means his or you or me. So, so in sectors of the society, we are looking at that kind of challenge, that the most likely cause
is going to be.
There's heart diseases fall in the category of what we laymen have been told are non-communicable diseases.
Yes.
And there's also conversation about an increase in those communicable diseases in the country.
Yes.
Again, there are those who argue that part of it is not that there's an increase, but that we've been able to diagnose these things better than we could before, and the reporting has also increased as a result of it. Which is it? Is it that there is an increase? Is it that we are now able to determine them faster? Is it a combination of the two, or are there other factors that we haven't considered?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, and also a situation that we always look back, because there's a history to all this. There's a history. If you look, for instance, I was reviewing the other day, look at the U.S. itself, where there's so much disease. In 1890, the rate of heart attacks in the U.S. in 1890 was 0. Research done, 0. By 1970, they had like 340 out of 100,000. Okay, that's a high number. Out of 100,000, 340. So you can see 0, and this is scientific. 0, and within 80 years, you have that. So why was it 0 then, and why is it, why?
What changed?
So you can see it's a disease that has a trend. When you look at our own history here, the doctors who are here, remember in the colonial times, it is European doctors who already knew about heart attacks, because heart attacks had started in their societies much earlier. But when they came here, they even looked for high blood pressure. If you look at the initial studies, like in the 1930s and whatever, people would look for high blood pressure. You go to to Western Kenya, Kisumu. I remember there is one doctor who did that and went and looked at 2,000 people, like in the 1928-30. I don't find anybody with high
Looking
blood pressure.
for high blood pressure.
And this is
and
somebody
found
who's
that.
trained in the UK, so he knows what blood pressure is about and knows what is the incidence of high blood pressure. Then you look at heart attacks. Really, the information is that really the first heart attack in an African here, clearly diagnosed by the doctors, was in the mid-60s. Okay, now any hospital today in Nairobi, go to Martha, go to Aga Khan Nairobi Hospital, there will be several patients with heart attacks coming. And remember the classical signs of heart attack. They are classical. You can't miss it. It's not something that, okay, we know that you can get a heart attack. There are various forms of heart attacks that don't present. But the classical heart attack with the severe chest pain, people saying like literally an elephant sitting on your chest,
So
sweating.
you know if you're having one.
You know when you've had a heart attack.
Yeah.
So it is a disease that we know the incidence has increased. As to why the incidence has increased, that's where now the issue is. But there is clearly more diagnosis because we have more diagnostic tools, we have more understanding, okay? But even with that, and that, of course, has raised the awareness that the cases may be more because of diagnosis. But clearly, there has also been an increase in the incidence.
Okay.
All over the world, not only here. Starting from the West, they picked up in the 70s, there are peaks. Here we have not picked up. We are still going. They peaked in the 70s in the West, okay, like in the US. Here we are still
peaking.
marching towards our peak.
Okay.
And that's why, in fact, this is why you see statistics like by 2030, we get to a point whereby now the cause of death in our environment here in low and middle income countries will be cardiovascular disease by 2030. We are in that. It's called epidemiologic transition. We are in that transition of disease.
So
transition.
what's causing all of this? Because clearly we're saying the majority of heart disease is acquired. Honestly, the number of people that come across your way over the last 4 or 5 years who are high blood pressure patients is staggering.
Yes.
So what is causing this? What exactly are the causes of? Because if we are saying the current trajectory is not looking good.
It's not looking good.
It's not looking good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that means that, unfortunately, if there are many people who have already acquired heart disease, then they're obviously in a place of treatment.
Yeah.
But then there's something that can be done in the preventative aspect if we're going to try to slow those numbers. So what is causing this disease?
Absolutely. I think the way to look at it is, when you look at those days when there was no heart disease, even in our own context, what was life like in terms of diet, in terms of physical activity? How are our lives? Because I think that's what we look at. In terms of even other social issues like stress
levels,
other issues like smoking, alcohol, and all that. When you look at life, let's say in the 20s for the African person,
for the ordinary African person.
Yes. What was their diet? Their diet was basically high fiber diet. Okay.
And by high fiber here we mean?
By high fiber we mean vegetables, fruits, whole grains. Okay. They had very little processed foods. And processed foods, we know they do a lot of damage. Salt was also taken in, it had traditional salts, and it was and the foods did not have to be. They didn't have to add salt to every food. Sugar, they ate whole products, okay, with a lot of fiber, and avoided all what has happened now with industrialization, where you have processed foods, salt, and sugar. On top of that, when it comes to consumption of animal products, if you look at the tradition, most traditional societies, meat was not eaten on a daily basis. Maybe I don't know about the single chief in a community, but the majority of the people, the chief may have done that, but the majority of the people at least where I come from central Kenya, meat was eaten with a purpose. There had to be a purpose.
ceremonial.
Celebratory.
There has to be some reason to kill an animal.
Yes.
You just didn't kill an animal, a chicken every day, a goat every weekend. Okay? So what we know that red meats, okay, with their fats and all that, they will raise your cholesterol. We know that animal products, particularly the red meats, will raise your blood pressure because they are also salty. They have fat, they have salt. They raise your blood pressure. So the combination of consumption of processed foods, a lot of salt, a lot of sugar, excess nutrition, what do you call excess nutrition? Because you find a lot of people are eating more of all the categories of the foods. They are taking more carbohydrates. Food it became also kind of a luxury. It's something you eat as a luxury. You don't eat when you are hungry. Ideally, you should eat when you are hungry. But we don't. You go out. Let's go and eat. You know, let's go out and eat.
It's a social event.
It's absolutely. That's exactly the word I was looking for. It becomes now a social event. So all that conversion, and then look at what industrialization did also. It changed the way of our occupations. I mean, you came here in a car, so unless you really program to exercise, okay, program to exercise, you're not going to exercise, okay?
True.
You're not going to exercise. So physical activity, in the older traditional days, you had to run around, run after that animal, deer, probably for 5, 6, 7 kilometers before you catch it, right?
Yeah.
You're out there in the gardens
in the
and
farm,
all that.
tilling.
So our level of physical activity also went down. So when you combine all these factors, and there's something that's always noted, like in the Second World War, when in some cities in the U.S., they took all the bacon, all the eggs, okay? All that was prioritized to be given to be canned and taken to the military in Europe. So some societies found themselves now eating, growing their own vegetables, okay? Those people who are left, after 4 or 5 years, the doctors noted that the incidence of heart disease
Dropped.
While, of course, to the people
Because now they were eating whole meals.
the sausages and the eggs were taken in canned form, had much more disease. So, in other words, this is something that's directly related to our modern lifestyles of what we eat, our level of physical activity, and don't forget also the stress. Stress also affects sugar, affects pressure, affects cholesterol, and societies have become stressful as well because now for you to survive, you have to get a job. Before, you were born in a community, the community had a farm, okay? Life was easy. After the harvest, you had celebrations and all that. Now, the stress of the industrial revolution and living also comes in. And then, of course, there are these, what you call destructive behaviors like smoking, excess alcohol, drugs, and all that have also come in. When you look at all these factors, but the good thing is that because it is now known what are the factors that cause cardiovascular disease, though there has been very positive action in dealing with them, and those societies that have actually been able to communicate to the populations of how do you identify blood pressure, how do you treat it, how do you prevent your sugar from going up, how do you identify you have sugar. Those societies have been able to reduce, let's say, the death from like heart attacks by 50-60%, death from strokes, about the same number, even up to about 70%. So in other words, there is something that can be done. Once you identify these risk factors,
then you start addressing them.
You address them, and you let the population, because for you to have an impact in the population, then the people have to know so that they can help them. They can really do something for themselves. We know that by looking at this, by doing this, you can have a great impact. And from an individual point of view, you can protect yourself from getting a heart attack, from getting a stroke, from having, of course, other damage. By the way, if you can allow me to complete that, the whole essence of all that is your arteries. Your arteries. Because you're not going to get a heart attack unless you have damaged your arteries. You're not going to get a stroke unless you have damaged your arteries. In fact, we have a saying that you live as long as your arteries. You damage your arteries at 45, you're done. You damage your arteries now, and those people you find walking around straight, good posture, healthy in their 90s, they have one constant. You look at the arteries
they
have
good.
minimum damage. So all this talk, all these things we talk about is how do we protect our arteries? You keep your arteries clean, unless now you go and get into some accident. And by the way, the diet that you keep your arteries clean is the same diet that will protect you from cancer. And cancer is the other killer.
You'll tell us about this diet.
Okay.
Let's take a break. We want to know how to keep our arteries healthy.
As we think about this.
Yeah. For as long as we can, 27 minutes to 10. Dr. Robert Mathenge is a consultant interventional cardiologist. He's also a phlebologist at Equatorial Heart and Blood Vessel Clinic and the head of the cardiology division at Nairobi Hospital. Yesterday was World what day?
World Heart Day.
Why are you looking at me like you don't know? Ndu?
I wasn't sure if you wanted me to answer or you were just doing those things that teachers normally do when they're going to tell you the answer anyway. So, I was just following your lead.
Okay. So I want you to tell us about NIVAS then.
Right. So kids went back to school this week, isn't
Yes.
it? But NIVAS has the great Shuja offers and celebrating the Shuja, which have been teachers, which have been learners, which have been parents across board in a very difficult year. So going back to school in the third term of what was a really short year, and NIVAS is saying, as you're going back to school, come and take advantage of the great offers up for grabs until stocks last.
The conversation continues with Dr. Mathenge shortly. Remember, Showmax episode 5 of County 49 is out on Showmax for as little as 760 shillings a month. www.showmax.com. You'll find that and very many other beautiful programs. 22 minutes to 10. The conversation continues. It's Eric Latif, CT Muga Ndu Oko, and Dr. Robert Mathenge, consultant interventional cardiologist. Yesterday was World Heart Day, and today we are learning from the doctor. And you've just told us before we took the break that it's possible for us to take care of our hearts. And by taking care of our arteries, how do we do this? Let's just go straight into it. What do we need to do?
I see. No, thank you, Eric. I think when it comes to what do we need to do to keep our arteries clean, because that's the whole essence of really preventing cardiovascular disease. It comes down to the usual to several things, and the most ubiquitous one there is diet, because diet is what will determine many other things. For instance, if you are taking a lot of let's say carbohydrates, excess proteins, fats, and all that, what happens to you? And when you combine that maybe with a reduced physical activity, you increase your weight, okay? Your weight goes up. When your weight goes up, it comes in with a lot of issues. Like your pressure starts going up. You have a more tendency to develop diabetes. You have a more tendency to develop high cholesterol. And when that happens now, those are the things now that damage, the things I've just mentioned. The tendency, the hypertension that you develop because of the diet you started with, the sugar that you develop because of the same, the cholesterol that you develop because of the same. What do? They interfere with the lining of the arteries. You start losing a very important component of the arteries. The artery is an organ. It has an inner lining which does a lot of work in sieving, selecting things that are adverse to the body, allowing some things in, allowing some things out. It's actually called, we have a medical term for it, it's called endothelial function. When you lose that because of high blood pressure, which originated from your diet, from diabetes, which originated from your diet, from high cholesterol, you lose that endothelial function, you lose that sieve, then things just start going into the blood vessel. Okay. When they get into the blood vessel they start swelling. The inside starts swelling, starts narrowing, and you start damaging. So you see, this is starting from just a diet that is high in the sugar, high in excess proteins, excess fats, excess salt, low in fiber. For instance, you are eating refined foods instead of whole grains. You are not eating adequate amounts of vegetables, adequate amount of fruits, some seeds, some nuts. All these are the things that keep the inner lining of the artery healthy, so that it does not become like a leaky sieve that allows things to go in and then start swelling from the wall into the opening of the vessel.
So then how come some people who may not be heavy in girth have high blood pressure?
Now, that's a very important observation. And the reason for this is because high blood pressure, everything in health has multiple causes. There's what may be the most common cause in society, what is affecting the lots of people. But you find there is a 16-year-old boy or girl who have high blood pressure
And are very
because they
ill.
have something wrong, an abdominal artery supplying the kidney. Okay, there may be some kidney disease. Maybe they got some bacteria that inflamed their kidneys. So, irrespective of age, irrespective of body size, they'll develop high blood pressure. But the majority of the people who develop high blood pressure, you find they'll be above 35, 40, and who develop this acquired form, which is the most common and impactful in society. This is the most common. This other one will be found in isolated cases, patients here and there, and they can be diagnosed and treated. So that's why you are going to find some people, somebody is lean and is going to have high blood pressure. Somebody is lean also, and they may have that. You may find that they have high cholesterol as well. Why? Because cholesterol is not just a matter of what you take into your mouth. There is also a function of how each of us is individually able to deal with our cholesterol. There are some people who produce more cholesterol in their livers, and whether they are lean or not, their cholesterols will go up. So they still have to try very hard to limit the cholesterol intake by selecting those foods. But we know for them, we may have to assist them with medication as well. So there's no one single cause for all these things. So if I can go back to that, then diet is one common denominator. It will increase your body weight, increase your what you call body mass index. If your weight goes above a BMI of 30, then we say that weight on its by itself is a disease. It is no longer overweight. If your BMI is above 30, is a disease, and that disease now will bring you problems. That weight will bring you problems. So, if you want to protect your arteries, then you have to go for
Start
a
with
high
diet.
fiber diet, fruits, vegetables, and we talk about 2 helpings of fruits per day. Okay, there was a time we used to talk about
2
5
helpings for food is what? 1 banana?
an
2
apple, 2 apples, an apple in the morning, an apple in the evening, or an apple in the morning and a banana. Okay, it's 2 helpings. Or that bowl serving, that serving bowl, small bowl for fruits.
Yeah.
That's good enough. As a serving, you can take even 2 per day. But you see, some of us eat, a whole mountain of
Fruit salad.
Yes.
yeah, and therefore, diet is key. If you can, and I think we mentioned several times about the diet.
Yeah, diet is a big
Second key is physical activity. We know that you need to be involved in some form of physical activity. Some people, fortunately, have a lot of physical activity even at their place of work.
Because of
You're
the work
supposed
that
to
they do.
You're supposed to do, if you do 10,000 steps in a day, you're doing very, very well.
10,000 steps in a day.
Yes, 10,000 steps in a day. That's
10,000 steps
It's
in a
not
day.
as difficult as you think, Eric.
you know
10,000 steps in a
do you
day.
know what I was about to say that because I find myself from my clinic is Nairobi Hospital, walking from my clinic to the wards to see patients, to this office, to that office during the day. I do 8 to 10,000 kilometers a day just by walking.
Kilometers or steps?
No, sorry,
Steps.
steps. Sorry,
Oh, okay.
sorry.
I was gonna say.
Steps. Even walking around just walking around the office.
Yes.
So it's very easy to do. A minimum of 6,000 is considerable. But if you can do 10,000, of course, that's very. But then, what we normally talk about is at least 30 minutes of exercise, because you may not be, your job may be sitting in an office. 30 minutes, 5 times a week. That we know has an impact on reducing cardiovascular disease. So 30 minutes of walking every day, or go to the gym, or do 15 minutes in the morning, another 15 minutes later in the day, because you may not have all the 30 minutes. But physical activity, we talked about diet, we are now talking about physical activity. 150 minutes per week, which you can divide into 30 minutes 5 times a week, will be very impactful in reducing your risk, your chances of developing as heart attacks and strokes. And then from there, we come now to the conditions we talked about. Or even before we go to that, let's look at the habits. The smoking. Smoking is a no-no. I mean, I've tried to look, there are many things. You try to look where you can see a benefit for something. Smoking is the only thing you'll find. There's absolutely no benefit.
None at all.
Other than damage.
Well, they argue that, when they smoke, they feel much better.
No, I knew that was coming.
You know about the effects of nicotine.
I knew that was coming, but I was thinking about other benefits.
Okay.
Because, alcohol, so smoking is a no-no. I mean, you have, but the good thing about smoking is that if you smoke, after several years, if you stop, after several years, your risk goes down completely. Yeah, and you're almost like somebody who has never smoked. So stopping smoking is absolutely critical, because what does smoking do? All those chemicals in the smoke, what they do, they'll go damage that lining of your arteries. The arteries become stiff, they become leaky. You start accumulating those deposits, okay, those swellings inside your arteries that limit flow. So, and of course, we are not talking about the other things that smoking will do, like, of course, the cancers and all that. Okay, so habits, smoking, what is a no-no.
Is a no-no.
Particularly if you have any other risk factors, you have high blood pressure, you have diabetes, then you know that you really
avoid smoking.
You're really, going to get in trouble if you continue to smoke. The other one is excess alcohol. We know that if you take excess alcohol, your cholesterol is going to go up. You're going to do a lot of things. And we know that people, the incidence of heart attacks is high in people who drink excessively. And what we recommend for adults, for men, for some reason, they're able to deal with alcohol a little bit. We say at least two drinks per day, which is like what you call, let's say, a beer or two. And for or a tot of whiskey, a glass of wine, tot of whiskey, that's 1 unit. Men, it's been found 2 of those will not cause any problem. Taken,
2 beers,
2 beers, and all that.
2 doubles.
And and for some reason, I don't know whether double applies. Double.
I'm not sure he said a double.
He picked from the 2. And that's his measure. 2 bottles.
Not at the same sitting.
2 bottles is not 1 unit. I'm sorry.
It's 2 bottles of beer. And we're talking about 2 pints of beer.
And then wait till the next day.
Okay.
and for ladies, what is allowed is 1 unit. And for some reason, it's been found that men are able to tolerate a little more. I don't know how, and women 1. If you do that, I don't want to say you do it on a daily basis, but even on a daily basis, it's not likely to affect your cholesterol. It's not likely to affect that endothelial lining. You're likely to be healthy. You're not going to increase your chances of getting a heart attack. So alcohol is one thing. The other thing, before I move from there, is stress. Because in our society, there's a lot of stress. There's occupational stress, there's domestic stress, there's societal stress, there's all manner of, and we know that they do trigger heart attacks. If you have, this milieu which can cause a heart attack, and then you get yourself stressed, it's going to trigger. It can be a trigger. So we need to find ways to manage stress. We need to find ways, either through counseling or through self-talk, or through accepting that some things have to happen. But stress, we know. And we know that as doctors in the hospitals. When you see somebody coming with a heart attack, and you go through their history and you see there was a trigger. Okay, this person, if they didn't go through that stress, maybe they would have had time to look at all these risks, and worked on them. But because the stress came in, it brought in the heart attack earlier. So we need to deal with it.
There's a discussion, Dr. that with reference to the diet, examples are given of communities whose diet is predominantly meat.
Yes.
Like the Maasai. And the effects that we speak of with regards to that particular focus on the diet brings in yet another discussion.
Yes.
Genetic diversity.
Yes.
And then there's a third discussion it brings in, what it is you feed your animals on, and whether this may possibly have an effect on what it is that red meat does to the individual who consumes it.
Absolutely.
I'd like to know your take.
I think what you find is that think about that man from the Maasai land who now comes and lives in Nairobi, like you. What is his risk? It's just the same as yours.
Yes.
So it looks like there's something else as well. Because when you relocate a Maasai man or woman to Nairobi, they have the same risk. They develop the same high blood pressure, the same diabetes, the same hypertension. So that tells you that those people who are out there in the community consuming meat, there's something else they are doing. And it may be something to do with also their other diets, also their physical activity. And their lifestyles. I mean, I suppose when you're out there, with a stick looking after your animals, how much stress might you have? So, in other words,
and you're walking,
it's a very important
you're not just
observation.
doing 10,000 steps. You're doing many more steps.
Yes, it's a very important observation. But there could still be some genetics. But when you translocate these people, you find that they have almost the same risks. Now, in terms of the types of meats that people eat,
and what that meat is fed on.
Yes, very important. But this now comes into the whole aspect of health, impurities in the foods. Where your vegetables are grown. If they are grown on a sewer, which has a lot of lead, a lot of this, a lot of that, toxins. I think that is a whole different thing, which will increase your cardiovascular disease, your cancers, and all that. I think it's clearly a big issue that needs to be addressed. But when you look at the meat in itself as a diet and how it is utilized, okay, and who utilizes it in this way or that way, then you can see a difference.
Does the type of meat matter? Red meat, white meat?
Very important. We know that if you look at, let's say, like what is called the Mediterranean diet, which in Southern Europe, where you find that people have a less incidence of cardiovascular disease than the North Europe, where they have a lot. They eat mainly what is called the Mediterranean diet. And one of the key features of that is fish, and white meat, chicken, as opposed to a lot of excess red meat that you'll find in North America, in Northern Europe. So we know that from those kind of community observations that when you eat white meat, fish and chicken, okay, mostly chicken has a little more cholesterol than fish, okay, but it still has some cholesterol. So I would say fish,
So
number
seafood.
one. Seafood, some sorts of seafood you have cholesterol. That's why we say we talk about fish. So fish, chicken, and there is no problem with the occasional lean red meat. Okay, lean. It doesn't even need to be lean as long as it's infrequently taken. For instance, if you're going to eat red meat only once in a week, it doesn't matter whether it has a bit of fat or not. As long as you are healthy, you are active. But predominantly, if you're going to eat, what animal product you're going to eat 3-4 times a week should mostly be fish, some chicken, and occasionally, red meat, whether it's 2-3 times a week, some lean red meat. So to answer your question, Eric, yes, the type of meat you eat matters. Yes.
With the urbanization, of course, you understand, processing of food is because of the places that people are living.
Yes.
And the access to heavy fiber food versus processed foods. People in urban areas such as Nairobi, just try and balance a diet for a typical Nairobian. Okay, so what you are able to access is you go and buy food that is already processed. If you're buying unga, the unga has gone through some processing. You buy whatever things you buy. It's only when you go to Marikiti to buy the vegetable that you're going to find it unprocessed. Most of everything else is going to be processed. How then do you advise that we balance this out?
Yeah, no, what do you select? Because you cannot avoid some processing. But if it is unga, you go for whole grain. Okay. Remember what we talked about. We talked about whole grain.
Yeah.
The whole grain will have the fiber,
husk.
and all that.
It's the kisiagi unga.
These refined unga, ugali, and all that. These are the ones that we don't. Even bread. I mean, whether it's bread, whether so. Go for
you're putting people out of business.
No, I just want the owners of those businesses to live.
It's the owner that you're taking care of.
To live.
But let me ask you this question,
Yes.
Daktari. I mean, what got us into this entire Western culture which we've adopted of refined foods when before the food is refined, it has all these value additions that we're talking about.
Yes,
so,
yes.
and the refinement seems to remove them.
Yes.
So, why?
Why did we start
How did
refining?
we allow ourselves to get into the? I mean, for instance, the grain millers. Can't they just mill and let whatever they're milling remain? Have all whatever it is. Must they remove?
For one grade, one sifted, one soft.
No. Forget the
Yeah.
marketing gimmickry that we have to put up with. I mean, the options have been there.
Yes.
It's not as though they're, if what is available is whole grain, it's what we'll buy and it's what we'll eat,
Yes.
and we'll benefit from it.
What led us to this, Dr.?
No, I think basically it's commercialization. Basically, because look at how many times have you tried to go to a restaurant to ask for a healthy diet. I want a vegetarian diet, healthy. You can't get it. Why? Because it's not in demand. And they look at you and say,
What's wrong with you?
There are many times I go to a restaurant and I said, okay, you are selling samosas. I want a vegetable one. And they'll tell you it's not available. Why? But
no
people
demand for it.
are not asking for it. People are not asking. So number one is commercialization. I think our attitude towards commerce and making money. That's one of it. And the other thing is that obviously I think you have to look also at the way societies are. For instance, you're working here in the industrial area, and you work throughout the day, and you've gone and got home. You have to prepare a quick meal.
Yep.
Sometimes some of these processed foods are the ones that allow
convenient.
you to make a quick meal, a quick ugali, chapati or whatever, quickly. So there are factors, but it's a very important question. And I don't know, actually, it can only be addressed through societies understanding, people understanding individually, and also because government has a role in really regulating people's lives. Okay, it has an interest because it still have to pay the bills for
those who fall sick.
Building hospitals, equipping, training people. The government should come up with those policies. Like years back, came back with the iodized salt, isn't it? Yes. So you can have government interventions towards those policies that can actually uplift health, and I think that's where we should be headed.
Dr. Thank you very much for teaching us a lot today.
Oh, karibu.
Dr. Robert Mathenge is a consultant interventional cardiologist. He's a phlebologist.
Well done.
Doc, we'll invite you, please. Thank you for coming today. We'll invite you again and again. Keep coming.
Oh, I've enjoyed the talk. I mean, it's even ended too soon.
Indeed. The show is also over for today. We'll be back next week from Monday, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Have a lovely weekend, folks. It's 10 a.m.